Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our monthly Flint Change Live. Today, we are doing a Q&A on creating engaging rituals that help set your workplace apart. So rituals are a really exciting part of our culture wheel. So I'm joined today, as every month, by my colleague and founder of Flint Change, Alex. Hello, how are you today?
Hello, I'm well. How are you?
I'm not too bad. I've just been up in Newcastle for a conference, so I'm buzzing yet slightly tired.
Very
I know
exciting,
that you're.
though.
Yes,
I'm waiting to hear all the ideas.
I know that. Yes, I need to process it all. But I know you're suffering with hay fever today, aren't you? Touch wood. It's something I don't suffer from, but you're a little bit streaming, aren't you? I think today.
Absolutely awful. My thoughts go out to anybody who has it, because I think it's kind of seen as a not very interesting, low-level thing. Actually, this year it's been really debilitating and painful and annoying. So my apologies if I look a bit ropey.
You look fine to me, because I know I don't know if it's an old wives' tale. I always hear people say that you need to eat the honey that's made by bees local to you. Does that help?
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, somebody else said that to me this morning when I walked the dog at the crack of dawn, and I don't have that this year. I have done it before, but I think it's just worth a try. So I will go to our village shop later. Thank you for your input.
Well, let me know how you get on. Okay. So we've had a couple of questions come in already. So what I'll do is I will pop them on the little ticker tape at the bottom and we can get going. So anybody who is joining us live, please do pop in any further questions in the chat. But without further ado, I shall get us going. So this is the first one I'll start with, which is quite a good sort of intro one. So let me remove the slide and then we've got a bit more space on the screen. Over to you, Alex.
Okay, so I've seen this question, so I have prepped a little bit of the research that we ran in our webinar, actually, because this is probably the least understood segment of our culture wheel, I would say, and yet I think possibly one of the most powerful ones when people get this right. So we did a lot of research before we run our rituals webinar, and one of the articles that we looked at, one of the research studies, and obviously there's always lots of research studies, we should always be critically thinking around all of them, but this one was the work group Rituals Enhance the Meaning of Work by Tammy Kim, 2021, and out of that it said they do increase team bonds and boost performance. And I think one of the reasons we love this so much, Maz, is that in the organisation we grew up in, there was a lot of rituals. And in fact, one of our colleagues posted on LinkedIn, they'd seen somebody after 30 years of working together. And I think we still have a bond with those people who worked in that organisation. There was a really strong sense of belonging. The increase in meaningful work and organisational citizenship behaviours. So that's people who care about the organisation and are engaged in it. And there was some psychological underpinnings demonstrating how they can lead to increased immersion in experiences, feelings of control, and increased liking for teammates. I think that probably happened to us.
It certainly did.
We feel really strongly that they are meaningful. There is some research that backs that up. That there will be other research. Again, there's a lot at the moment about not saying, "Oh, research says." It's really important that we think critically about research, but it gives us a really good yardstick to start and to build on. So we feel really strongly that they're meaningful when done well. We have loads of examples, and I think I've seen some of the other questions as well that have come in, so I'll give you different examples as we go through. I think one of our favourites is the customer chair, which is in particular when one of your values is customer first or something similar, or actually the customer is just really important to what you do. And there's a customer chair in all meeting rooms to remind everyone that when decisions are taken, we need to think about what the customer's view would be. How would they access this product service? Is it something they've asked for? Does it show up in the feedback? So that you are always thinking about the customer when you're making key decisions that affect them. So I think, it's something that is quite fun, it's quite gimmicky, but on the same hand, it has a real impact, and it helps people constantly think about what the customer would want. So somebody goes to that chair with their feedback around, actually, when we look at the customer insight information, this isn't something they've asked for, and it doesn't work with X, Y, and Z product that we already have out. So that's just one example, and we'll talk more as we go through.
Yeah,
but I love that one.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it? Okay, so the next one is quite an interesting one, because I'm quite passionate about values as well. So we've just launched our values, and how can we use rituals to make them more widely known? Because it's something, I mean, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but it's something often we see when we go into organisations, that the values will be on a poster somewhere, but they're not necessarily embedded. I remember one organisation I worked in, they were on the back of the toilet door. So
absolutely, and
love your thoughts on that.
And I think also, when we go into organisations and some boards aren't that interested in values, it's essentially because they are not meaningfully embedded, and the organisation isn't using them as a set of guidelines to help us understand how we behave towards each other and how we operate together. So we use this a lot in our values embedding programs. And we've got some lovely examples of how this has worked really well. I was just writing our newsletter, actually, and it reminded us of some of the global rituals that we use for values, and how values can have such a different level of interpretation across languages and across global cultures. And one of the things we've done recently is a global live session for an organisation who is trying to bring their values together across the organisation, and talking about what those global cultures are like to live in, what they're like to perform in, and organisationally what the culture brings. So we quite often think, in particular in D&I, about individuals, and that's really important. But actually, we've also got to think about the global cultural overlay. So that's one of the things we've been doing recently. We do spotlights on values for all new starters, and ongoing values sessions that ask people to bring examples of how they've lived that out and how it's worked really well for a customer or for a colleague. We have this is actually from Rituals for Work: 50 Ways to Create Engagement, Shared Purpose, and a Culture That Can Adapt to Change. A book by Kursat Orzenk, and he talks about the legends. So it's a kind of recognition approach where the legends of a particular value get recognised and thanked. Community conversations, so that's about bringing people together. We used to do this at the first organisation we came from, where everybody would get together on a Friday afternoon, there would be an update, and then there would be an open conversation where people could say, look, we say we're customer first, but actually finance take 28 days to process a refund, and therefore actually we're receiving 4 calls from that customer in those 28 days. That doesn't feel very customer first, and it allows you to get some stuff on the table. It does require a psychologically safe environment, and we know not all cultures are like that, but that's a really lovely one, being able to talk openly about, okay, you say these values are important to us, but actually we're not showing that in our ways of working, which is also an element in our culture wheel. The small moments jar, used to do this with my kids, but it's, it's about reinforcing and celebrating the small moments around the way we operate and behave towards each other. So loads of lovely values options in terms of rituals. And, one is just regular sessions where we talk about what they are, what they mean, what that means we need to do differently on a day-to-day basis, and being, really kind of present. I think that's a bit of a jargony word around what those mean to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've worked places where there's always been one longer term employer where it was put the customer at the heart of everything you do, but often decisions came down not necessarily to the customer insight, but to the financial benefit, which was a little bit jarring at times.
And subsequently, people disengage. and they think, don't write that on the back of a toilet door, and then don't follow through with processes that are relevant to that. And that's why values don't always work, because we talk about them and we make pretty pieces of paper that tell us about them, but actually, and I think that's where we're really proud of Flint, is we do the pretty pieces of paper, but the more important work for us is how they become meaningful, and they change the way the organisation works for growth, for performance, for productivity.
Yes.
Little eye itch,
okay.
Sorry.
I think no, you carry on. Anyone who's just joining us now, Alex is suffering with her hay fever today, so share any tips that you might have. We've discussed local honey, but any others that you've got would be gratefully received. Okay, so this one is really I know we sort of touched on it slightly, but this is about how can you use rituals to help really embed your culture in your organisation.
Again, probably, Maz, we should have had our culture wheel. So we're the Flint have a culture wheel that we believe is a number of elements.
I'll see if I can find it.
Okay, a number of elements that make up culture. So, for example, we've talked about values. Communication is another element. So, you know, having regular, open, two-way dialogue. If one of your values is transparent or trust, you know, creating that ritual of the global live session that we mentioned earlier enables and encourages two-way dialogue. It provides a forum. It enables people to actually do that. It goes back to that having integrity around, if we say our value is being transparent, we've got to be transparent, and we've got to create forums and mechanisms, vehicles that allow us to do that. And rituals are a great way of doing that. We quite often talk about our first organisation, which I know I've mentioned a lot, where every Friday afternoon everyone came together upstairs, huge top floor, everybody came up, we got a briefing, and then we went through, you know, some of the key things that were getting in our way, and it was an opportunity to ask questions. That's a great communication ritual, and for us, I think, you know, that stays with us. I think other examples, one that I loved was an organisation that used to go on away days and sales away days, these big kind of conferences, and have lots of kind of recognition and a really high energy sales session. And the targets and the interventions that they set subsequently weren't being adopted by the organisation. And when they started to think about why, they found that actually the operational elements weren't being effectively briefed. They weren't in that high energy, exciting sales conference. They therefore weren't part of the collaborative, innovative ideas session. They were just kind of told to implement. So subsequently, the sales director changed the sales conference to be what he called the road trip. And in fact, what they did was they took their sales teams around the different regions, and they had different operational teams with them at each time. So they had the opportunity to involve those operational teams, for them to go into the retail environment and say, what stops you from selling this product? Well, actually, let me tell you, customers don't want it. This is what they, you know, they're right at the front of that kind of cutting edge of talking to customers after that product's been sold. So that was a great opportunity actually to embed a culture that for them was about pace, implementing a strategy, being more agile, and being more joined up as an organization. So collaboration, innovation, and we love that example there. So hopefully there's a couple there. Happy to talk about more if people want to give us a shout.
Thanks, Alex. Now, I have found the culture wheel, but StreamYard being StreamYard, I didn't have it in the right format. So I'm just fiddling around in Canva to get it into the right format. So I shall share the culture wheel shortly. We've got another question actually here whilst I'm doing that, which is specifically about a ritual which is perhaps seen as a bit negative, and what can we do about that? So if you could.
Yes, so actually our one of our colleagues talks about this, and a ritual that they used to have. It was another sales ritual actually, and it was an every morning 9 o'clock, where are we on our sales? And it you know, started as this kind of high energy sort of stand up, you know, how are we doing, and increasingly became something that people started to fear. Well, actually, my figures for yesterday weren't great, but I'm trending well. But in fact, because it's a very short term, very micro session, it started to be seen as quite negative. There started to be blame and one-upmanship within that session. So our advice is tweak it, evolve it, or stop it. If you can tweak it so that takes a much more positive stance, because a lot of rituals have a genuine, real meaning and requirement, then great, do that. Reset the boundaries of that ritual, reset the contract, we would call it. It's a very consultancy type word, but what you're in there for and the reasons. Be explicit about it being a safe environment. So if you can do that tweaking, great. We talk a lot about rituals needing to evolve. So great, I'll talk about that in a moment. So I was working with a client recently who had put in this great innovative thing with her team, and the results had shot up. And we talked about what would happen when they plateaued, and she kind of said, well, they might not plateau. And my view was, I think it will. And again, this is the same thing with values embedding. We don't always have this sustained energy. Things need to evolve. They need to change. They need to be seen as exciting and interesting. So if you can evolve it, great. If none of those things can work, stop it. Take a break, take a breather, create something new that is effective, positive, and meaningful. Can see you
Fabulous.
tapping away with questions and culture wheels. Do you want me just to talk through the culture wheel really briefly? Do we have the time?
Let's go through all the questions we've had, because I don't want anybody to get upset that their questions didn't get asked, and then I'll share the culture wheel again, if that's okay. So the next one is acquisition, which I think is quite an interesting one, because we do work with a lot of clients who are growing very quickly, and often that does come about through mergers and acquisitions. So I think it's a really topical question.
Agree.
So
agree. So again, just referring to the book I referred to earlier, Rituals for Work, 50 Ways to create engagement, shared purpose, and a culture that can adapt to change. We must always source our references. I remember in that book, which is well worth a read, it's a lovely book, they had a kind of wedding ritual. So when they acquired an organisation, they actually brought them in together. We talked about this in our webinar, Maz, and they actually talked about the cultures, the rituals, the things that within the cultures they really wanted to keep and build on that were really important to the organisation. And similarly, those things that actually probably should go. So they reset some of those cultural boundaries, reset some of those behavioural expectations, and were really clear on the rituals that needed to stay and go and how they became merged. So they actually ran that as a ritual, which I just loved. With the organisations where we have worked with them in acquisition, some of the rituals that we run are things like strategy speed dating or cultural speed dating. So in a similar way to actual speed dating, you take key elements of your culture. So you'd set open questions for people to work through, or you take your functional strategy and you would work through that so that people started to understand more about each other's cultures and strategy, for example. So that's a really helpful way of bringing them together. Running the spotlights on values, so that if the acquired organisation is expected just to fit in, I guess being explicit and reasonable about how you're going to support those people. But I was with a client yesterday in the city, and they work on one floor. They've just moved from 2. And actually what they were saying is there are cultures within that floor. There are tribes within the organisation. So it's not just acquisitions, actually. It happens in all organisations. And there is a real sustained energy around needing to be really clear on what we mean by those values and behaviours. What does effective behaviours look like and not so effective behaviours look like under that value? Within that ritual, why do we do it? Why is it helpful? Why does it mean so much to us? Can those rituals be spread across the whole organisation, so in fact they can see the impact? This is a bit cheesy, and some organisations we work with hate the phrase, but we have values ambassadors. and or culture ambassadors. So those people could go to the other rituals and then bring it back to the other organisation and roll it out. So it's quite a complex question. I hope I've answered it at a high level. And again, Maz, perhaps we ought to go back to that person and see if we can have a more complex conversation. But absolutely loads you can do in acquisition to support that with rituals and other tools.
We've got one more question, which is about how can you make a start, but I thought we've got a free resource on how to do that, so I thought I've shared that in the comments, but Great. If we get time, I'll just go back to sharing the culture wheel if you want to sort of do a quick chat through that. And I can just check if there's any more questions.
So the culture wheel gives us the kind of holistic elements that we believe make up culture. So clarity of purpose, the vision, mission, strategy, and we see rituals around that, you know, speed dating around strategy in particular. Symbols, rituals and stories, we're talking about that now. The stories are really fundamental. People connect emotionally to stories. They use a different part of their brain. It creates tension, empathy, and stories are great ways of engaging people in a strategy, a plan, an approach, a review, anything. And again, the client I was with yesterday, they were a founder-led organisation, and actually some of the behaviours in the old culture were quite specific, and in fact a lot of people still hold a really strong corporate memory around those. And we see this a lot in our culture audits, don't we, Maz, where people will say, well, Bob shouted at me 14 years ago. Okay, well, you know, is that really relevant in the culture? Yeah, now, you know, never put your head above the parapet anymore. But in fact, the culture's moved on, and we might not have been explicit about that reset. So that becomes really relevant. Communication, we see, you know, like the global lives, we see breakout rooms encouraging two-way conversations so that you've got a dialogue rather than just communicating to. We see following up the feedback that comes from those conversations via other sets of communication. And I guess just constantly reinforcing the messages. We can't find any evidence behind this, but we believe you need to tell somebody something 7 times with various different ways of doing it, various mechanisms, you know, some in writing, some in person, some on video, to keep communicating. I probably won't talk too much about measures and goals in terms of rituals, but they're absolutely fundamental. And I guess things like the speed dating helps understand each of our own agendas, so that you can see what people's goals are and whether they relate to yours. And if they don't, how do we fix that? Values we've talked a lot about, and ways of working, which for us at Flint is always fundamental and often gets missed in terms of culture shift. So for us, ways of working would be things like, Lucy used to give this example, the green light meeting in a startup where they were all working on different projects, and quite often they would go beyond or not go far enough in terms of where they wanted those projects to go. And there was a lot of frustration and tension around it. So we got them to work on that program for 2 months. It had a certain set of boundaries and measures around it. Stop, go into the green light meeting with the founder, with the, you know, the people who were relevant stakeholders, and then the project got a green light to go forward, or actually to be cut and for us to start something new and different. So loads of kind of process focused, but also fun, interesting, meaningful, belonging rituals that sit around ways of working. That's a little Fabulous. Speed view of the
speed view. Well, maybe we can do another session where we go a bit more in depth into each of the pillars. So this final question, which is how do I go about making a start, and I have popped in the link to, we've got a free resource on how to go about that, so that's in the comments. If anybody wants to send me a DM, I can send that to them separately, but it is also available on our website. So I don't know if you wanted to sort of give a few tips about that before we finish.
I think for me it would be involve people, ask them what they want, how does it fit in with what they do. So, you know, don't give them a random ritual that nobody really gets. I mean, quite often when I started rituals, I would get a few eye rolls. Oh, she's doing something like this again. When I was a leader, and it takes a little while for people to get behind it. So be clear on what they want. Start looking potentially with some things that already exist, but they exist maybe in a less formal way. And if it works and people like it, roll it out, build on it, help that work, providing that you're not going to stop something that already works.
Yeah.
Be really clear on what you're trying to achieve. Is it about impacting behavior, process, communication, belonging, and design it around that, but co-design it with people who are going to be involved. Make sure that they're inclusive. So I think when we look back on our careers, we probably had some rituals that might now not be seen as inclusive.
I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to be really clear on who your audience is. And if it's a Friday lunchtime boozy drink and you've got people there who don't drink, does that work for them? We get feedback quite often in our culture audits around, actually it makes me feel uncomfortable. So just think through who is in that audience and what that ritual should be, and probably don't overwhelm people with 19 new rituals because you've got ultra excited. Slowly. Culture shift is always about sustained energy. It's not this big fanfare at the beginning that then just drifts off. It's a sustained couple of years or more energy around creating something that is reinforced and relevant.
Thanks, Alex. So little plug for our newsletter, because you mentioned earlier that yes, you were doing some work on it. So this is a link to how to sign up to our newsletter. So we share hints and tips and our latest reads, what we're up to. So do sign up. I've just put that in the comments as well. So I think that is all the questions. I'll just quickly check DMs. Yeah, that's all the questions. So thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody who is watching, and also to those of you who catch up afterwards. We do share this, goes straight onto our LinkedIn page after this, and we also publish it to our YouTube channel. So all of our lives are there as well as on our page. So thank you, everybody, and see you next time.